Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, this afternoon, time for another independent bottling company, one thinks. And this week, as you can see from the title page, we're looking at Malts of Scotland. Now, I don't often get the opportunity to taste their bottlings, even though Bartles Whisky are the sort of UK distributors of Malts of Scotland, but they don't seem to get an awful lot of them, quantity wise, and certainly not any great amount of sampling juice, shall we say. So the only time I get to taste these bottlings is generally when I'm judging competitions, and all of today's samples came courtesy of last year's Independent Bottlers Challenge, into which I think they actually put 8 in, so I chose 6 that I considered to be the ones that I'd kind of really want to share with you guys, i.e. the best ones. And I don't really know a huge amount about Malts of Scotland, apart from like Duncan Taylor, for example. The company started as one man's collection, and this particular gentleman was called Thomas Uers from Germany. And sounds like he collected casks like other people collect bottles by the sound of things, and apparently he's got a warehouse full of the damn things, hundreds of casks, and I don't know how long he'd been collecting them, shall we say, but I imagine over a number of years. And in 2009 thought, well, I probably ought to do something with them, so set up Malts of Scotland and started bottling these casks as most of the independents do, non-chill filtered, at cask strengths and single cask releases, and some really interesting stuff the guy's doing, it has to be said. I mean, I tend to come across them when I'm doing sort of competition tastings, and up until fairly recently there'd been the usual kind of stuff, some good, some not so good, combination of different casks, but the selection of samples I've got today are some really interesting stuff, it has to be said. And like I said, because Thomas is a German, that obviously the company is quite big on the continent, and I'm guessing Germany and the Scandinavian countries tend to get the sort of like the biggest chunk of any particular bottling, and the UK gets sort of yay much. I mean, and I have stocked them over time when I've had samples, and you know, I think like I said, any other independent bottling company, they have some good stuff and some stuff that I would choose not to purchase. So anyway, I mean, there's probably more information on their website, so if you want to check that out, obviously you'll see the link in the information below the video. Well, I think I may as well just introduce this afternoon's lineup. Okay, so you probably remember a couple of weeks ago where, well, I think I was doing, I can't remember what I was doing now, God, it seems like such a long time ago, and I sort of said, well, we're starting off the tasting with the youngest whiskey, and it's 21 years old, but this week I'm starting off with a 26-year-old, although it's not the youngest whiskey in the tasting, it has to be said, and there's obviously a good reason, because we've got a number of different types of casks and from different countries and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to kick off with a 26-year-old Bladnoch. Now, the Whisky Magazine, in their infinite wisdom, don't really seem to give me an awful lot of information about the individual bottlings, it has to be said, and so I kind of have to go digging around and see, play a bit of detective, but I can't find any information about this particular bottling. So maybe if someone from Malts of Scotland is watching, hopefully you can sort of say whether I'm correct or not. But I think this was distilled in 1991 and bottled in 2017. All I know, like I said, all I know is it's a 26-year-old Bladnoch, bottled at 47.8%. So that's that one. Second bottling we'll be looking at is an interesting one called Jane Doe, which I think I'm right in saying is kind of American slang for a dead female. What's he trying to say about this particular bottling? I do not know, but there you go. It was distilled in 1989, making it 27 years old. So, well, as we know, it's probably only going to come from one or two particular distilleries in reality, isn't it? And probably, well, anyway. The interesting thing about this has been finished in an ex-Caribbean rum cask. It was bottled in 2017 at 48.2%, and the cask number for this one is MOS 16044. Third bottling we'll be looking at, again, got some serious age to it. It's a 25-year-old Springbank. Ooh, nice. So this was distilled in 1992, bottled in 2017 at 47.1% from a bourbon hogshead, and the cask reference number is 17028. Incidentally, on the label it says 42.1%, but in actual fact, after doing a bit of digging, it's 47.1%. Like I said, Whiskey Magazine don't always seem to sort of get their labelling right anyway. But the third bottling we'll be looking at is a grain whisky. This is a bit younger, and it is called the Warehouse Shop North British, distilled in 2000, I think again bottled in 2017, 16 years old at 57.2%. Now you're probably wondering why I'm doing it at this point in the tasting, but if you look at the colour of that, no, it's not been aged in a first fill sherry cask, but it's been finished in an export cask. And the cask number is MOS 16038. So I don't think I've come across a grain whisky finished in a port cask before. So, well, they work in sherry casks, so why not port casks? I think that's going to be interesting. And the final two are both American whiskies, which is hence why they're at the end of the tasting. The first is called the Tullahoma 2011 6-year-old. Now, Tullahoma, I believe, is the location of the George Dickel distillery. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Over the last year, maybe 2 years, suddenly there's been an influx of Dickel casks into the secondary market, and prior to that, you'd very rarely find an independent bottling of an American whisky, certainly not Dickel anyway. Interesting enough, none of them have the distillery's name on it, so they probably sell the casks with the caveat that you cannot use their name. Anyway, this is been bottled at 54.9% from obviously a first fill barrel, and the cask number is MOS 17023. And the last bottling we'll be looking at is, again, like I said, another American whisky from the Heaven Hill distillery. Obviously they've allowed the use of their name. This was distilled in 2001, I think again bottled in 2017, 16 years of age, 46.5%, and those mad Germans have finished it in a Masala hogshead. What? I mean, an American whisky in a Masala hogshead. I mean, who thinks about doing that kind of thing? I mean, you know, that is completely mad. And I thought the Swedes were mad. But so it looks like the Germans are mad as well. So anyway, this has been bottled at, like I said, 46.5%. I think this was bottled as a 50 cl bottle. And the cask reference is MOS 17024. So that's today's lineup. I think it's going to be really, really intriguing. Certainly, I think a couple of the finishes are going to be intriguing. So let's kick off with a bit of Bladnoch then, shall we?
I will always keep my mind set.
Right, okay, so independent Bladnoch can be pretty hit and miss. I mean, even, you know, I've tasted some great old Bladnochs. I've tasted some dreadfully old Bladnochs, shall we say. So anyway, let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Oh my word, that's good. Mature but still retaining a nice citric fresh edge, plenty of barley, bit of straw, mature, I said mature cheddar there, but no, mature barley, little bit of creamy oak as well. This is an absolutely stunning old Bladnoch, and Yes, there's a fair amount of oak there, it has to be said, but it's kind of got that sort of vanilla-y and that sort of dusty, mature character, which is just absolutely gorgeous. Incidentally, I gave this a 9.3 when I scored it, which is pretty good, and this is absolutely fantastic. And if it is indeed the 1991 26-year-old bottle of 47.8, God only knows. Like I said, that's the information I have, but I couldn't find it online, couldn't find any information about it. So, but bloody hell, that's a damn good nose. Really deep, really clean, lovely balance. Oh, what's not to like about that? Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Opens with a coffeed oak, barley, malt. It's quite a sort of a malty, for an old Bladnoch, it's actually quite robust. I mean, a number of the older Bladnochs do tend to come across typically lowland with that light citric kind of style. This has really got some guts to it, really malty, slightly chocolatey on the finish as well. Again, yes, there's a lot of oak happening, but I think it's really nicely balanced. There is a little bit of citrus, certainly coming through on the finish. I'm getting a light sort of tangerine-y, sort of orangey note, honey, a little bit drying, but 47.8. I mean, that's actually pretty good ABV for something of that age, it has to be said. So it's obviously a pretty tight cask, but it's, yeah, a lot of oak notes, a lot of oldish kind of spice and coffee, a little bit of vanilla, but oh, that is damn good.
We fall again. Now we have learned to fly.
Okay, so let's move on to a bit of Dead Woman then. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us now. Quite robust, but elegant. Beeswax, straw, old banana-y, slightly tropical fruit, bit of melon, dusty barley. That's got some lovely character to it. I mean, certainly reminds me of some older stuff that I've tasted from I was about to say Teeling then, but no, Cooley. Oh, that is stunningly deep. A little bit of honey as well, but that sort of, yeah, it's all really nicely integrated. It's not a huge amount of complexity, I must say. It's a lovely nose, it's got a lovely depth. It's, like I said, not hugely complex, but there's enough going on there, and I think I gave it an 8.9, I think, which I think is pretty fair. It's, you know, very good, just not quite exceptional, but lovely, absolutely gorgeous. Let's see what the palate's like. Again, a lot more of the rum cask on the palate. A sort of rich, deep, slightly dried fruits. It hasn't completely overwhelmed the character of spirit. I'm still getting a bit of barley, bit of honey. It's a bit drying on the finish. I mean, it is, again, 48.2%. I'm not going to bother putting any water with it, but pleasantly spiced. Again, relatively simplistic, but it has a lovely depth to it, you know, it's a lovely, enjoyable whiskey, and it certainly doesn't seem like 26. It's certainly that alcohol is kind of giving it a nice kind of freshness to the finish and balancing up the sort of the rum cask sweetness, it has to be said. So all in all, another fantastic bottling, I think.
We are not
Okay,
sleeping,
so
we
let's
change.
move on to the 25-year-old Springbank. So, always love to see old Springbank aged in American oak, and indeed this is, so let's see what the palate gives. Quite malty, heavy, a little subdued, has to be said. There's a lovely classic Campbelltown malty saltiness going on, but the saltiness is not huge. It's kind of more emphasis on the fish oils and the oily malt. There's a touch of violet. It takes a while to kind of get going, it has to be said, but then, well, you know, it is 25 years old, so yeah, some pleasant barley notes, no real peat, not a huge amount of oak, I'm guessing probably refilled, hoggy possibly, chunky, robust, yeah, I mean it's a lovely nose, it has to be said. Little bit of chocolatey sort of spice coming through now. Almost kind of winey, sort of pruny. I mean, I don't know whether I'm imagining it, but it's sort of a little bit of an almost kind of PXy kind of note happening, sort of under that treacle. But it's certainly an American oak. I mean, there's no. I don't think this has been finished in XPX casks, but it's got that sort of interesting kind of note. Anyway, let's see what the palate gives. Oh, that's a chunky, malty bugger, it has to be said. Licorice, treacle, tar, little bit of smoke, touch of violets on the finish. Yeah, that's a chunky old malt, it has to be said. Slightly fishy now, really malty, and again not getting a huge amount of oak character. It's all pretty much about the spirit, but that spirit is really good, and it's got a nice gentle spiciness on the finish, which is kind of lifted by, I mean, even though the alcohol's only 47%, it certainly gives it that little bit of lift. I mean, I think if that had been bottled at sort of a lesser ABV, it might have been a bit overly treacly and overly malty, and hence that alcohol just sort of like just gives it that little bit of a lift. But aftertaste just keeps going and going and going. I mean, that is, ooh, that's nice.
Explode, we fall again, but just
Okay, let's move on to the port finished North British. Let's see what the nose goes on this end, shall we? Quite winey, smoky, red fruits. The port cask is pretty obvious from the get-go, it has to be said. But there is a little bit of the sort of dried column still fruit, a little bit of spice, bit of strawberry jam or plum jam possibly, something like that. A little bit of treacle. That's actually really appealing. I really like that. I mean, and yeah, okay, you can argue that I'm not getting a huge amount of the grain character. Didn't give that a particularly high score, it has to be said, but this is always the thing, I suppose, when you're doing competition work, you're tasting sort of like, a number of samples of the same thing against each other, and some kind of appeal more than others. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're particularly bad whiskies. It's just a case of, you kind of rate them, I suppose. And, I think if I had tasted this on its own, I would certainly say, yeah, I'd stock this, because it is really interesting. But just in the realms of the competition, there were probably one or two other bottlings in the 13 to 20 years of age group that probably appealed a little bit more. Like I said, it's nothing against the quality of this, because yeah, this is really interesting. Getting a little bit of a nuttiness now, probably from the American oak. See what the pat's like. That's tannic. I almost feel that it's sucking the moisture out of my mouth. Again, lots and lots of red fruit, a little bit of jamminess, a little bit of spice. Not getting a huge amount from the spirit, apart from a little bit of alcohol. Quite spicy on the finish, and I think this is probably where my relatively low score, although it's not a mega low score, kind of came in, because it is really drying, and well, 57.2%. Yeah, I haven't got any water in my water jug, so anyway, really nice and spicy, interesting, different. I really like that. And it kind of, like I say, every now and again you get one of these bottlings that kind of goes against the grain of what you kind of believe in, and I bang on about balance between wood and spirit and etc, but every now and again you taste something and you just go, ooh, that's interesting, and yeah, I think that kind of falls into that category, so yeah, that's interesting.
We fall.
So let's move on to the Dickel, or the Tullahoma as the case may be. See what those gives us. Quite a lot of sweet corn, a little bit of violets, plenty of vanilla oak, but some lovely herbally and spicy, earthy rye to kind of like balance that up. And it's got quite a cereally kind of note coming through. I mean, it is fairly young. I mean, it's 6, which I think is probably about the minimum sort of age you really want to sort of look at sort of bottling American whiskies. I mean, although as we know, they often tend to get bottled an awful lot younger. Incidentally, while we're on the subject of that, of course, I'm doing the 4th of July. Well, it's only June, but anyway, and I think all tickets are sold out anyway, but that's a really nice nose. I mean, I like Dickel. I mean, you know, the amount of people that don't know that Dickel actually exists. I mean, I don't know how old the distillery is, but of course, obviously, the most well-known Tennessee distillery is obviously Jack Daniel's. And I love the sort of like the fairly hefty rye content of their mash bill, or should we say the perceived fairly high rye content. Obviously you don't need a huge amount of rye to make the impression that there's more rye, if you see what I mean, but as you know, I much prefer a good dollop of rye to balance up sort of the sweet corn. It's a little bit caramelly possibly. I mean, that, you know, it's still that kind of youthful cereal character kind of coming through, but and I mean, it is a relatively straightforward, but I think it's got some nice depth to it. It's pleasant, lovely purity, it has to be said. See what the palate's like. Young-ish, oily, lots of rye, lots of kind of grippy, spicy rye, cereal, bit of vanilla, little bit of corn, just to kind of like sort of give a little bit of balance. I mean, it is certainly more towards the bitter rye kind of end of the spectrum, that sort of wonderful intensity of dark rye grains and spice and earth, and the finish is a little short, I will say, and it is relatively straightforward, but it is kind of my kind of cup of tea. I mean, it's really sort of, and although the finish is a bit short, it is kind of like hanging around. I mean, I know that sounds a bit of a stupid thing to say, but it does kind of end fairly abruptly, but it kind of, the aftertaste is a little bit longer. A little bit of treacle, a little bit of black pepper possibly, maybe a little bit of violet as well. It's nice, interesting, pleasant. It's not kind of earth-shattering, but I think sort of overall that's still a pleasant American whiskey. Right, okay, so on to the Heaven Hill. Now, the interesting fact, and I think it's a fact, and I probably should have checked this up before I said interesting fact about Heaven Hill, that they don't tend to sort of stick their name on their bottlings. I mean, as you know, sort of well, pretty much most of the American distilleries, or the bourbon distilleries, should we say, have a number of brands which tend to have a number of different mash bills, and I think I'm right in saying, although I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm not, that sort of Heaven Hill don't actually release a Heaven Hill. I mean, they do sort of Evan Williams and a fair few other bottlings, Rittenhouse and Pikesville, I think. But I don't think I think I've only come across Heaven Hill in inverted commas in independent bottlings, and again, not very many of those, has to be said. So anyway. This was, like I said, finished in an ex-Marsala hogshead. Well, I don't get an awful lot of Marsala, it has to be said, and I think that's probably the thing about American whiskies, with that sort of heavy sort of oak content, and this has got a fair amount of oak. Your finishing is not really going to make a huge dent in the characteristic, but, you know, again, it's very much in the mould of the Evan Williams single barrel, or the classics heavily rye content single Evan Williams. I mean, there's some sort of burnt charcoal, a bit of toast, a bit of corn, and again, I love Heaven Hill when the rye is very, very noticeable. And from time to time, I've come across bottlings of theirs that tend to be a little bit more on the corn fat and less of the rye, and they kind of lack something. But this has certainly got plenty of rye and a nice maturity as well. It's nice and rounded. I'm not getting any really young cereal notes. I'm not getting any oiliness. This is really nice and mature. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of dried fruit, I suppose. If you start looking for it, knowing that it's been Marsala finished, you start kind of hunting for Marsala kind of notes. But in all honesty, really, it's the sort of kind of classic American characteristics that are to the fore. It's stunning. I mean, really deep, really balanced, really complex, and I think sort of with or without the finishing cask, this would have been a really complex bottling. Oh, that is lovely. Absolutely stunning. I think I gave this a 9, and I think I certainly stand by that score. This is bloody good stuff. Oh, nice bit of spice as well. Anyway, let's see what the palate gives us. Well, that's a big chewy mouthful of dark rye, dark chocolate, spice, treacle, tar, licorice. Slightly tannic finish, a little bit of dried fruit, maybe that's the Marsala cask. There's a bit of a lightness in the aftertaste, which may well be the cask kind of just sort of creeping through on the finish, but that's really dark, really intense, really spicy, loads of rye, real intensity. It's a grab you by the thingies kind of whiskey. Just the sort of stuff that I like. That's my kind of American whiskey, should we say? And there's a little bit of sweetness. The corn kind of really only kind of comes through right on the finish, and that's, to me, that's how I like my American whiskey. I like a lot of rye character. I like a lot of bitter, sort of treacly kind of rye, and the corn just kind of sitting there, kind of just giving a little bit of sweetness. I've never been a big fan of the other way round, with lots of corn and maybe a little bit of rye. That's just a personal preference, but really long, really treacly, really enjoyable. That is a really nice way to finish a tasting, it has to be said.
We fall again.
Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, I think, a pretty damn good spread of bottlings, it has to be said. The Bladnoch was absolutely fantastic, it has to be said. Like I said when I was tasting it, I've come across some good Bladnochs and some poor Bladnochs, and that certainly was a good Bladnoch. And I kind of still, even though Raymond is no longer a Bladnoch and it's all changed, I still have a kind of affinity for the distillery, shall we say. And if only what they were doing now was, you know what I'm trying to say, don't you? If only, as they say. The Jane Doe. I kind of really like that. Again, it's really nice to come across a sort of like a really old Irish whiskey that's still got loads and loads of freshness and character. And the palate was a bit heavy on the rum cask, it has to be said. But I still think that was a really enjoyable whiskey. The Springbank, again, well, no, not again, as in heavy on the oak cask, but in actual fact the opposite way around. In actual fact, kind of classically sort of big, butch and malty. I've certainly tasted Springbanks like that in the past, and that was pretty good actually. I mean, that would have probably set you back a fair few quid, it has to be said. As we know, independent bottled Springbank does tend to be rather expensive, and I think if you bought that particular bottling you would certainly not be disappointed. The North British port finish, well, hats off to Malts of Scotland, to Ewan for doing something a bit kind of left field. I kind of liked it, I mean, although like I said when I was tasting it, that it kind of goes a little bit against the grain of what I kind of espouse, shall we say, the whole balance between oak and spirit, and it was pretty much all about the port cask finish. But kind of every now and again you just kind of get this kind of liking for something that you probably shouldn't like, and I think that was probably one of them. And the Tullahoma, again, pleasant bottling. I like Dickel. It is certainly sort of one of my favourite American distilleries. If you're not going, not hugely complex. Only 6 years old. I mean, it was probably ready for bottling. I mean, I can't sort of knock Malts of Scotland for bottling that. I mean, it was certainly quite pleasant. Maybe I'd like to have seen it with a little bit more age. Certainly the age of the Heaven Hill was absolutely spot on. I mean, that was stunningly good. Like I said, with or without the masala finish, I don't really know whether that had a huge amount of input into the actual characteristics of the spirit, it has to be said. But either way, it was certainly pretty bloody good, it has to be said. So that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I know what I'm going to be doing next week, and it's sort of, what's the word? A regular occurrence, shall we say? So, well, those of you that watch the show pretty often will probably know what I'm talking about. Anyway, all that's left to say is have a great weekend and good afternoon and good ramming.
spring.